Good morning and thank you very much for tuning in. In today's video, I'm excited to remind you of God's character. There's many facets to His character. Probably the one that we may know the best is the God of the miraculous, the God that is big and powerful, the God that can do big things like create a universe, like split open a sea, like raise the dead, feed 5,000 people. That's the God that can do such big things. But I wonder if you know God and His character as a God that loves detail, that is so involved in the extreme detail of our life, that you and I are so valuable and so important to Him, that everything in our life He's aware of and He's engaged in. Let me remind you of some stories from the Old Testament, and particularly how God saves Israel from slavery out of Egypt. And I want to show you the detail to which God has planned and structured and made it work. It starts in Genesis 15, where God makes His second covenant with Abraham. And He explains many different things to Abraham, including what's going to happen to his descendants. And He explains to Abraham that they are going to be slaves to another nation. But He promises that He will deliver them and that He will punish that nation. And I want to highlight in Genesis 15, verse 14, this particular verse, because it's the start of what I want to show you. And it's in verse 14, God says to Abram, and also the nation whom they will serve, I will judge. Afterwards, this is my people, shall come out with great possessions. This is God in Genesis 15 already telling Abraham something very specific about how this exodus will take place. Now, let's move on 400 years later, and we encounter in Exodus 3, God speaking to Moses at the burning bush. And God explains to Moses how He will deliver His people. And again, He uses this detailed explanation, and He uses the word, He says, my people will not leave empty-handed. Empty-handed. And then in Exodus 11, this is after 9 of the plagues have taken place, we see God giving a very specific instruction for this detailed plan of His to take place. And he instructs Moses in chapter 11, verse 2, and He says, speak now in the hearing of the people, and let every man and every woman ask their neighbor, that's the Egyptians, for articles of silver and articles of gold. You see, this is the God who created the miracle of Abram's son. And God knew the whole story of what will happen. Joseph will save his people in Egypt, and he will rescue his people out of Egypt, and He will give them a promised land. And Jesus will be the descendant who will save everyone. This is the big picture that God has in His mind, and He's working everything for this to take place. But I don't know if you noticed that God is such a God of detail that He even thinks about exactly what His people will need for their 40-year time in the desert. And this that I've been showing you is the preparation of how God works this. Is He tells Abraham they will leave with great possessions. He tells Moses they will not leave empty-handed. And then He instructs His people to ask their enemies for the things that they will need. You see, this is a God who knows that for the next 40 years, He will provide their food. He will provide their water. But He also in detail thinks, what will they be wearing? How will they be preparing the food? And He makes a way for them to get everything that they need so that they can endure and thrive for the next 40 years. And let me show you the final passage in Exodus 12, where God says, right, Moses, now is the time. Take my people and leave. And we see in verse 35, it says, now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked for the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. That word articles can also be translated as utensils. Can you see this? This is a father who even thinks about the pots and pans that his people will need for the next 40 years. He provides their clothing, their utensils. He even treats them with gold and silver and bronze. And God knew this 400 years before it even took place. He planned it, and he already told Abram about it, that his people will leave with great possessions. And what happened next is just the most amazing miracles, because for 200 years the Israelites were slaves. They were treated like slaves. They lived like slaves, which meant they had very, very little. Yet when God delivers his people, they leave Egypt loaded with gold, silver, bronze, utensils, clothing, linen, precious metals and stones. Everything they asked for, they got. And they're leaving Egypt filled with blessings and gifts, detailed gifts of a Father who knows exactly what they need. See, this characteristic of our Father that knows our intimate details of our life is confirmed by Jesus in the New Testament. In Matthew 10, Jesus is talking about and teaching the people how to fear God. And one immediately thinks of fearing God because he's so powerful and magnificent. But the immediate examples that Jesus gives to remind them why they can faithfully trust and fear God is, he says that if there are two little birds and one were to fall and die, God knows about that little bird. And Jesus continues, he says, God knows every hair on our head. I want to remind you there's 7 billion people on the planet, and he knows the number of hairs that each one of us has got on our head. You see, that's a Father that is so involved in the detail of your life. Can you see how God is active in everything? It's not just the promise that I have good plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. It's not just the big picture that your Father is looking at. He knows about the email that you're waiting for. He knows that your car is going for a service today and you're a little bit worried about how much that will cost. He knows about the pain in your hip. He knows about that concern you have about your child and their math ability. He knows and he works and he's actively involved in everything. In the same way that he was working towards enabling the Israelites to have food and water and the appropriate clothing and the appropriate utensils so that they can do 40 years in the desert. In the same way, my friends, your Father is working actively in your life to give you what you need for today and for tomorrow. Romans 8 says, he works everything to good for those who love him. God is so involved in your life. And I'd like to remind you today that he's not just the God of the miraculous and the big. He's the God of detail. He knows everything about your day. And I want to encourage you to choose to trust this Father of yours, this God of yours, that knows everything about your life, because he's the God of the universe, but he's also the God of pots and pans and everything relating to your life. Choose to trust him. Choose to love him and faithfully see how he provides for you in your life. May this bless you in the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you and goodbye.